Good afternoon and welcome to this National Housing Federation webinar. My name is Katie Teasdale and I'm Head of Member Relations at the National Housing Federation. Today we're going to be discussing how housing associations are responding to the coronavirus outbreak. I just wanted to start by saying this isn't one of our usual webinars. Normally we're all in the same room in our London office, but for obvious reasons we're doing this remotely today. For that reason, there may be a few issues with connection or just getting to grips with it, so please do bear with me. Today, we're joined by Maxine Espley, Executive Director of Health, Social Care and Support at Accord, and Mario Ambrosi, Director of Communications and Marketing at Anchor Hanover. Both will be sharing their organisation's approaches so far to the outbreak. I think it's important to set out that the focus of this webinar is on sharing current experience and practice. It does not seek to replace official government or NHS advice. Feel free to ask questions throughout the webinar. You can do this in the question tab in your GoToWebinar dashboard, and we will try to answer as many as possible in our Q&A session at the end. We'll be sending you an email as soon as we can, which will include a link to a recording of this webinar. Slides from today's session will also be available to download. Okay, so now I'm going to hand over to our first presenter, Maxine Espley.
That we're all learning together at the moment. We're all in exactly the same place, trying to work through what is a fast-moving and very complex situation that I think it's reasonable to say will demand of us in our careers some exceptional circumstances that we certainly probably haven't faced before. As Katie said, my role at Accord Housing Association is the Executive Director leading our care and support services. But given some of my previous background, which was predominantly working in the NHS, and given the level of training the NHS certainly offer in terms of preparing for emergencies or major incidents, a lot of what I'm sharing today is in the context of what we're doing at Accord, but very much also using some of that learning that I've brought to the organisation with me from the NHS. Certainly previous emergency planning training has very much kicked in over the last week. So I wanted to just start very briefly by giving you a quick profile of Accord, hopefully to help you think about those areas of our operation that are perhaps similar to yours or indeed the differences. So we've got about 13,000 properties which are across the West Midlands area. We've got a fairly substantial development programme that we're currently working through. So we're on site at the moment with a number of important developments for us. And for those of us who know us well, we also have a manufacturing facility for off-site housing, which produces about 1,000 a year, so a reasonable sized workforce in that environment. The vast majority of our maintenance services are in-house. That excludes some specialist areas like gas, but again, we've got quite a large workforce that are currently providing maintenance services, including voids. And we do have a significant level of care and support provision. So as the slides in front of you will show, we've got 35 sites of registered care services. So that's nursing, residential care or extra care, and that's just under 1,000 beds and operated across the West Midlands. We also in the West Midlands run a number of supported housing services, homeless housing first services, and we also have quite a large domiciliary home care provision, which is in fact East Midlands, North East and Wales, and you'll see we deliver about 40,000 hours a week of home care. The workforce associated with care and support is just under 2,700 staff. So You'll see from the information I'm going to share with you about our approach, perhaps given the size and scale and diversity of Accord, why we've taken this approach. But I think it's absolutely pertinent to all of our organisations. So what has been our approach to emergency preparedness? Well, I thought I'd share first some of the principles, and I'm sure these are very similar, if not almost mirror, lots of the principles that you will be approaching this period with. I mean, first and foremost, we want to make sure that at the top of our agenda is maintaining safety for all of our customers through this period, whoever those customers are across that range I talked about in the last slide. We also, of course, and we're very proud of the level of quality of services we deliver, but we recognise that quality standards, as we move through the stages of planning, will have to be within the resources we have available, and I'm sure we might talk about some of that later. We also have a key principle about our workforce. So one of the first things we've done in approach is to look actually how do we enable our frontline teams, irrespective of what they deliver, to focus on our customers. So how can we make sure that perhaps some of the things that would normally occupy minds and perhaps distract from some of that inevitably in our day-to-day businesses are removed as quickly as possible? And actually, how do we support our staff who will be fearful for themselves, their family, as well as wanting to do the best for their customers? And then because of the nature of Accord and what we deliver, and I suppose particularly that significant care and support focus, we want to make sure that we are maintaining an important role in the community and supporting that wider health and social care economy. That's how we deliver now every day. But actually, we're going to have to take some view of where it's safe to do that. But we're certainly not a provider that just wants to close our door to that wider economy. We want to work together through this period, but we will have to take some views about safety. So we've put in place a structure. This really went into place formally, I think a week ago today, although we've done some planning before this. We escalated the structure, and we have used, I'm sure this will be familiar with people, we've used exactly the structure that operates within the NHS. So we've set up our Gold group, and that's chaired by our Chief Executive with all of the executive directors on that group. And we're really there to make sure we've got strong leadership through this period. We're giving clear and decisive action and direction, but we've got oversight as this unfolds. So, for example, Gold are meeting daily by conference call, and we get data now every day about the impact of what's happening on our workforce, on our customers, and on our operation, so we can make timely decisions. We've also got our Silver group. Now, Silver is chaired by an executive director, so I chair the care and support one, and colleagues chair housing and our assets groups and our corporate teams. And really, Silver are about enacting the operational response from Gold. So monitoring at a much more detailed level, taking those decisive actions for our parts of the business, but making sure we're clear where we need to escalate to Gold. And again, as of Thursday of last week, Silver as well as Gold has been a daily, in fact twice, there will be two, because things have escalated, which I'll talk about in a minute. And then we've got our Bronze group, and this is really the delivery team. So once Silver have confirmed what needs to happen to make operational delivery work and to plan, Bronze actually largely go away and enact that. And interestingly, we've brought together into that group our subject matter experts. So given we are so diverse and geographically spread, it's really important each part of the business is involved in that. So very quickly put that structure in place, got the key people together, set up the terms, and I'll talk in a few minutes about some of the things, hints and tips from that, and including capacity. We then, and I've only used a summary on this slide, but there is a document with much more detail that we've developed. We created what we called our 4-stage plan, and effectively it's very easy as the media messages about this and the government messages unfold to start behaving in a way that requires for us to be in a much more disruptive place than we are today. So in other words, we need to be making decisions based on where we are, but planning for that worst level of disruption, but maybe leaving some of the action until we get closer to it. So to give you a feel for that, we've set stage 1, really, where we've got no confirmed cases. We've got concern, got a bit of noise in the system about supply of goods. We've got families starting to contact us, but generally minimal disruption. I sat in a room last Tuesday and said that's where we were. We've certainly within a week moved. We've moved significantly on. Level stage 2 is really the point at which we started to get some staff self-isolating, or when testing was happening, tested positive. So we were starting to see some disruption, still reasonably low level and isolated to various services. Certainly started to get concerned about supply, lots of calls from suppliers about not being able to provide things. And we started to see daily records of gaps in staffing. Level stage 3 is really where we start to get a number of confirmed cases across the organisation. And as the government steps up its response, which in fact happened yesterday, we're starting to see a much wider impact on our services, unwell customers, lots of staff asking questions, lots of customers asking questions, and having to coordinate supplies in a very different way. And I think we're in Accord have assessed that we're now at the beginning of level 3. So we've been planning for this, we now enact that. Level 4, I didn't even come up with a term really to describe that, because that's really when you're in probably more of a command and control situation where you've got significant disruption times too, you've got severe gaps in your workforce, you're unable to continue to deliver services in the way you did before. So our principle through this was to respond appropriately at each level, not to escalate to taking decisions that you didn't need to yet, but from day 1, plan for that worst case scenario of being in step 4. So that's our approach and structure. Happy, of course, later to give any more examples or to talk through that, but that's to give you a sense of how we've approached this. So how are we managing, identifying and managing the risk? And I've just given some examples here. So one of the first things we did last week is we actually wrote an assurance statement. And that statement, a couple of commissioners, because we deliver Counterport particularly, asked for it, and it turned out to be a really important document. So this statement was about how are we preparing for the increasing threat presented by the coronavirus and COVID-19. And the kind of things that are set out in that assurance statement are that, you know, what's your initial planning structure, but when might you move to a more formal controlled situation. We had some very honest discussions about what services, if it got to the worst case, would we absolutely have to protect. And actually our view at that time was care and support, maintenance for essential urgent maintenance and payroll. And that doesn't mean the rest of the infrastructure isn't important, but if it absolutely got to the worst case we could think about, they would be the things we'd have to protect. We've looked, as you can imagine, at things like visitor policies to services, how operatives in home, and again, with that 4-stage planning process, not jumping to advice that isn't required at this stage, but being proportionate at each stage. Lots of focus on infection prevention, and probably the biggest 3 areas are the ones below that in the list. Workforce planning, so how will we cope with potentially significant reductions in staff, not because they're all ill, but because some are ill, some have got caring responsibilities, some will be now self-isolating because of the advice on social distancing, but also some because their households have got people in who are unwell. So huge piece of work on workforce planning. We have assessed our customers, particularly on the care support side, but not just care, but supported housing, and looked at their vulnerability, and we have in fact prioritised our customer groups to those that we believe would need to have face-to-face support sustained, and those that actually we might be able to move to a more technological enabled or call enabled contact for welfare if we got to that stage. And communication, absolutely critical. I think we were a little slow in the first stages on communication. We were so heads down trying to work through the situation, but we've definitely stepped that up now. Daily briefings out there to our teams, simple facts based on the guidance, but making sure every day, and I would say one of the biggest issue there is about version control of communication. Sounds really simple, but actually that's difficult when your communication can change, certainly within the day, let alone daily. And then, of course, regulators and requirements. We are expecting, we understand, some emergency legislation this week that might, we use the word relax some of the regulation and requirements. I have to say, particularly on the care side, it is a real concern for us that we clearly want to, as I said right at the beginning, provide safe services, but we do know if we move to the stage 4 position that we've assessed, we might be into a different place on what we can deliver, and we need regulation to move with us on that. And then finally from me, I just pulled out some quick hints and tips that we've kind of learnt over the week. So we moved very quickly to daily contact at that gold, silver, bronze, however you structure, dependent on your organisation, that daily touch base about how it's unfolding. And for example, after each Prime Minister's brief, we will now have a call at gold level because we need to make sure we're responding. The advice, there is advice out there, as Kate said earlier, the Department of Health and Social Care and others, but you have to check it constantly. We've got somebody now in our team who is daily and more checking that guidance to make sure we're never giving or making decisions that without consulting that. It's not mandatory, it is guidance, but it's an important way of being able to assure how you're making decisions. One of the things we've done over the last 2 days is put deputies in the structure. They're not formally appointed, but noted who the deputy would be for every significant role as we started to get our first couple of managers off sick. You're going to need some team capacity. I was at the Department of Health last week and one of the ministers said, if we're probably not spending a significant amount of our time on planning at the moment, we're probably not doing enough. So how do you do it and avoid burnout? And the way we've done that is to quickly prioritise what's essential and what we won't do. We are collating the financial impact. At the end of the day, this is all going to cost. The government have announced money, so we all need to be clear about that and how we get it, but we need to be able to evidence, at least to some extent, the impact. I'm using my networks absolutely, constantly. to make sure we're checking out and working with others, but checking out our decisions. And finally, and sorry, I should say on those networks, every local authority has a local resilience forum. My experience to date is most care and housing providers getting little if no contact. I did a conference call with one in our area this morning, and they hadn't spoken to any other providers. So I would really encourage to find out who your local resilience network lead is. And finally, you know, we're good at managing risk in our sector. We have to do it all the time, but we have developed a dedicated risk log. We are making sure that our key decisions and actions are recorded. At the end of this period, we want to be able to reflect, but we want to be able to be clear about how we assessed risk and made actions to mitigate it. And Chair, I'll finish there. Thank you.
Thank you. That was really enlightening, and I'm sure that, I know there are lots of questions coming, but before we get to that, shortly I'm going to hand over to our second presenter, Mario Ambrosi, and before that I just do want to remind you all, if you do want to submit questions during the presentation, please do so, and that means we'll be able to ask as many of them as possible at the end. Mario, thank you.
Hello everyone, hi. Just going to try and get my slides up on the screen for you, and hopefully you'll be able to see in a moment. So, yeah, I'm going to focus on comms, which, as Maxine said, is a fairly significant part of what we're doing at the moment. We've adopted a number of sort of principles just in terms of the way we work. A lot of similarities in terms of the way Maxine was describing the sort of business continuity management approach. So we've had a small team that have been meeting really daily since the beginning of this month, really. But it was only yesterday that we fully kind of enacted the business continuity management process. So that small team that have been working, as I say, for a good couple of months have become the silver team, and we have an executive board that are the gold team, and then obviously the same as Maxine, the sort of bronze teams on the ground. The sort of principles that we've focused on in terms of comms are really about having one source of the truth, and primarily that's government. The advice has been moving so quickly that we've needed to, we've had to sort of resist the urge to provide lots of guidance for people, because as soon as you provide that guidance, the things have moved on, and actually it's much more effective to be providing information direct to effectively signposting people to the horse's mouth, so to speak. I should say a little bit about who we are as an organisation. So Anchor Hanover is a specialist provider of services to older people. So we have about 60,000 older people who are our residents, and we have around 10,000 staff. We operate 114 care homes and around 1,700 retirement housing schemes and estates, mostly in England, although we have a very small presence in Wales as well. So the biggest challenge for us, I think, is getting messages quickly to colleagues and particularly residents when, as I say, things are moving so quickly. We're particularly in our care homes, but also this is also true in our housing. We have a very mobile workforce who aren't sat in front of computers all day. So the tool that we're using most is Workplace, which is a closed social network similar to Facebook, but effectively for use within an organisation. That's proved massively helpful in terms of being able to get messages quickly out to the entire organisation. but the point that Maxine made about version control is massively important. So what we've been doing is the Silver team have been meeting daily, and then we've been updating an ever-growing Q&A document, which just flash up here, an ever-growing Q&A document that covers off any questions we can anticipate people might want to ask and anything that people are feeding back to us. As I say, it's become quite a tome at the moment. And I'll
Mario,
yeah.
sorry for interrupting. We've just realised that everyone can see the control panel, which is obscuring some of your slides. There's a red arrow button at the top. Could you just click on that and that will minimise that?
There we go. Has that fixed it?
Perfect. Yeah, there's a bit of a lag, but that'll be fine. Thank you.
Brilliant.
Sorry, everyone. Thanks.
Yeah, so as I say, that document is becoming quite a tome, which I think is a good thing because it means that we're covering off all the questions that people are asking, and obviously doing our best to anticipate questions before they come. But the change that we're going to make, I think from today really, is to start providing further sort of a Q&A directly for residents. I mean, I think the big change for us was yesterday's announcement from government in terms of older people effectively self-isolating for the next 3 months, which obviously has a fairly significant effect when you're responsible for 60,000 older people. But I think the principle that we've followed most is focusing our communications to our colleagues, because with such a dispersed workforce and such a dispersed kind of footprint, and making sure our colleagues feel as informed as they possibly can be is probably the biggest priority for us at the moment. I mean, it's interesting that we posted something late last night on our workplace, and immediately people were looking at it. By this morning we had well over 200 comments and questions coming off the back of it. So it's proving helpful to get that message out quickly. The one thing we've found is that despite us having a fairly comprehensive Q&A, as I've said, is people actually just want some reassurance. So it's all very well seeing it in black and white in a document, but actually often they want to be told that by a line manager, and they just want to double check and be certain, and that's particularly true of our residents too. So one of the challenges we've got is how we manage that demand that's coming through. So wherever we've answered a question in our frequently asked questions, if people are coming back and saying what's the answer to X, Y, and Z, if we've answered it already, our response is pretty clear. We've covered that in the FAQs. Go and read them. It's attempting not to be unsupportive, but it's really crucial that we manage the quantity of queries that are coming through to us and kind of handle them efficiently. So just to flag up, if I can. Oh, now I can't flick through my slides. If you hold on 1 second, let me see if I can do that. There we go. For some reason, there we go. So this is our homepage of our website, and you can see we've got very sort of prominently the top latest update is the coronavirus latest information, which is about our approach to visitors to our locations. And we're planning to put further information on that today. I sort of mentioned a Q&A that we're publishing for residents, and also a communication that's going to come directly from our chief exec to residents as well. Okay. So the communications to residents, as I've said, are largely via our colleagues. That's our sort of key channel at the moment. So far, we have issued one sort of formal communication to residents around restricting access to our services to non-essential visitors. I think different organisations have taken different views about what non-essential means. Our approach up to now is that we are still allowing access to our locations for relatives and residents, and we're looking to maintain that for as long as we can. That will require, obviously, the right amount of safety precautions, but you know, older people facing potentially long periods of time in a controlled environment, we want to do our best to sort of ensure people are able to see their loved ones. And supporting the sort of the factual information that we're putting out. We're having almost daily videos that are being posted on our internal channels from our chief exec, pointing people towards the key messages, reminding them to make sure they're checking for information regularly, and generally just doing our best to encourage colleagues to remain positive. So that's the internal resident side of things. From an external comms and marketing perspective, we've had requests for information or interviews from pretty much every national media outlet. We have an agreed protocol in place in the event of us being asked about whether cases have been, confirmed at particular locations. Obviously, we've got to balance data protection responsibilities with responsibilities to protect people at those locations who may have come into contact with someone with a confirmed case. So the approach that we have decided to take, thanks to advice, is that we will confirm if a case has been confirmed, but we wouldn't be naming individuals, and the principle would always be to inform any affected people around the location before we did that externally. If we get media requests to visit locations, which we've had plenty of, we're declining those in line with our policy of not allowing non-essential visits. And we've scaled back our sales activity and our PR activity, although our marketing advertising is still generating a very high level of response rate. So we are that is continuing. And I guess I think it's just really important to say how crucial it is that we keep the positive messages flowing out into the outside world. I think it is quite tempting. Certainly, I was tempted initially when this sort of started becoming a bigger issue, to sort of sort of batten down the hatches and sort of just focus on responding to the sort of inquiries that are coming. But actually, this is an opportunity for us to be showing just what a important role that we play as a sector. So we're working really hard to make sure that the positive messages are flowing out on our social channels and also through the media. So we've had some lovely initiatives in our care homes that have come from bottom up, not come from the marketing team, come from the locations themselves, encouraging the local community to write to residents and send in pictures and that sort of stuff. And that's all fantastic. And the more we can do to amplify all that good stuff, the better, I would say. And then just to finish on monitoring channels, it's effectively become a 24-hour operation. So we have a rota for managing our internal channels, our external channels, and our social media channels. So that the comms team are kind of managing that across the team. We've put in place increased levels of monitoring. So we're keeping tabs on workplace posts, social media posts out of hours, which is not something we would always do normally. We're getting some more activity on social. I'm touching wood as I say this. So far, not huge amounts, but that probably reflects our resident base. And our approach to that stuff is what I think all good practice would suggest is kind of if people are asking specific questions or have specific concerns about something at a particular location, is get those conversations offline and actually have actually speak to the individuals. We have a crisis manual that we always have that is proving quite useful to make sure that everybody in the comms team has access to our sort of different social channels, Facebook logins, all that sort of stuff. And I suppose the last thing is just to emphasise the importance of checking awareness and checking understanding. So we are broadcasting quite a lot at the moment. We're putting out a lot of information, but equally important is making sure that we're capturing the feedback that we're getting from colleagues and residents. So we have a colleague forum. We're kind of using them to tell us whether the comms are landing effectively, whether people are understanding them, whether we're getting the tone right, whether we're covering the correct information. And I think as the situation continues to change, that's going to continue to be really important. So I think that was probably all I was going to say before we wanted to open up to questions.
Thank you. So we've got a bit of time for Q&A now. Before we start, we have been sent a huge range of questions. Some of these I'm sure Maxine and Mario will be able to help us with. In some cases, I think they might potentially go beyond their expertise. So what I am proposing to do is we will post these questions to the Federation's LinkedIn group. I will provide you with contact information, details on how to log into that before the end of the webinar. And I will ask you to help us answer those questions. And hopefully we can come together and source the information that will support one another. Obviously, the Federation will also take away any questions where we can help and come back to you through that forum and in other communications as well. So to start, we have had a lot of questions around gas servicing, picking up on whether we know if the regulator has had any conversations about relaxing health and safety checks, questions over what the implications will be should gas servicing certificates expire, questions around flexibility. So I suppose, Maxine, I just wondered, have you reflected on this yet? How are you ensuring compliance? Do you have any experience that you can share?
Our first principle was to make sure we maintain safe services, and that has to be to follow compliance. And in the stage of planning and delivery that we are at the moment, we are maintaining compliance in the approach to our services, whether that's to health and safety or indeed to the care regulator. However, in our stage 3 and 4 plans, there are some areas where to enact them in the way that we believe we may need to, we would need to see some relaxing of some regulatory requirements. At this point, of course, we don't have authority to do that. Nothing's been relaxed, is my understanding, in regulation. However, in the meeting at the Department of Health and Social Care last week, there was a discussion about whether some of that may be covered through the emergency legislation that hasn't been published yet. So I think inevitably it's that kind of middle ground that's probably the more challenging for all of us as providers, because we're still in kind of business as usual, but nothing about this is business as usual. But obviously at this stage, we're taking the view that we have to maintain compliance. But I say, if you look at some of the things we are proposing we might do at stage 3 or 4, then they would require some relaxation of regulation, and we're waiting to hear more about that.
Thank you. The Federation is engaging with the regulator, and I hope we will be able to bring forward clarity around these points as well as we move forward. The second big theme that has a lot of questions being posed are around what we can do to manage urgent repairs where customers are self-isolating. Questions include, has anyone got any guidance around this, conversations and how we have this dialogue with key contractors, perhaps in some instances where they're reluctant to provide these services. What are you advising external contractors regarding gas inspections and entering customer homes? Yes, that's what I just said. Are you business as usual unless a customer is self-isolating? Again, Maxine, I think that might be more one for you. Have you got any reflections on Accord's approach to that at the moment?
Yeah, so we've had exactly those same questions and discussions over the last week as everybody else. So we've done, I suppose, 2 or 3 things. One picks up the comms point that we've spoken about earlier, and just making sure that we are giving the guidance that is coming through government and government departments to our staff, and not jumping at this point to that worst case scenario stage that I referred to earlier. So having lots of dialogue with people. We have had conversations about things like protective equipment and what is appropriate in the circumstances. We have given guidance to our operatives about the circumstances they might find themselves in. At this stage, I would say we are business as usual from a safety compliance point of view, i.e. anything that requires us to enter a property, whether it's one of our current support schemes or a house, through our communities team or a shelter scheme that requires compliance, we are delivering, and that's either in-house or in conjunction with our contractors. We are starting to, I suppose, withdraw some activity that we don't think is essential, and we're having daily discussions at the moment about that to make sure it's proportionate. I don't believe there's any firm message or guidance, so perhaps in the discussions that you're having through the NHS it would be helpful, but I think we're all trying to individually risk-base this at the moment with our workforce and balance that protection of our staff, but making sure we are still compliant where we need to be. But we're certainly not doing non-essential work in the same way that Mario described.
Mm-hmm. Mario, clearly communication both with contractors and partners and customers are really key to this whole process. Is there anything you would like to add around this in particular?
I guess really just that, yeah, it's just that point about sometimes the desire to be helpful, it doesn't always end up being helpful. Just with the speed of change in terms of guidance, I'm not sure anyone's qualified to give advice. Actually, I certainly am not, because it's unprecedented times. But our approach is fighting the desire to sort of copy and paste chunks of text that come from various websites and share them. Actually, it's point people to the relevant guidance and keep reminding people to check for updates.
Thank you. Another question we've been asked is from a small sheltered housing specialist. They have a scheme where a full meal service is provided, and they're asking if anyone has any suggestions as to how they can keep that running in the event of the virus hitting the scheme. And I think you were referring to some risk analysis you'd done, Maxine, and about how you had analysed priority groups and been thinking about where you could do face-to-face really well through this. Do you have any observations on that it would be helpful to share?
So we have done an assessment of each of our environments and what we provide, including catering. We at this point are still providing a full catering service in every service that had it pre last week. We, however, do have some proposals of moving to a different model. Firstly, if we didn't have the staff capacity to deliver, or secondly, if there was a supply issue. So we've done a lot of work trying to make sure we can maintain supply as long as we can. But obviously, in planning for some of the worst case, we have to paint a picture of a scenario where that's not possible. So we've looked at all the things I'm sure everybody else has, kind of clustering services and reducing the number of sites that make food available, and looking at transport options. We've had discussions with two providers, national providers, who provide alternative catering services, so the Cook Chill, and how quickly that could become available, ideally through a hub and out to services. We've looked at the provision of local fresh food, so that we can move from perhaps a larger catering provision that we have now to more local source, local deliver solutions. So there's 6 or 7 on our risk assessment at the moment that says if we couldn't maintain it as it is today, how could we move? And certainly if people want any more detail on any of those, we'd be happy to share after this. But I suspect we're all undertaking very similar risk assessments at the moment.
Thank you. Some more specific questions have come on in which really pertain to that. So they touch upon, is the review on what work should continue in housing for older people schemes? How should we approach handling social distancing in properties where there are residents both over and under 70? Has anyone put any consideration into whether communal areas should be closed? Which I think you're saying is proportionate and depends on the sort of state of urgent emergency we're in by your system, Maxine. Is there anything you would like to add on any of those points?
So over the last week, we've done an assessment of all of our sites and how, if we needed to, could we create kind of sections of those buildings. It's not easy in some of our sites compared to others. Some of our care schemes are built already, for example, on a household model. That makes it actually much easier. The ones that are more traditional, larger buildings are more challenging. So we have a plan, should we need to enact that could, for a period of time, enable us to maintain people at home, which would always be what we'd want to do, as long as they were safe and able to stay there, but to try and reduce the social interaction for a period with other people. And I do at this point have some customers in some services who are self-isolating. At the moment, the numbers are small enough for us to look at the plan we've done and to do risk assessments based on that individual. I'd say probably my biggest challenge at the moment is actually not necessarily in our care schemes, although of course the vulnerability of the customers makes that a challenge. But we've got somebody self-isolating at the moment in one of our domestic violence refugees, and there are a lot of shared facilities in that building. And therefore all we've been able to do is to take the plans we've developed in the last week and risk assess it and try and minimise the impact for others. But as numbers potentially grow, then I think we're into a different place anyway of not isolating individuals necessarily, but looking at the broader scheme.
Thank you. Mario, we've been asked specifically, what do you have in your crisis manual other than social media logins? What's the sort of information that should be in there? And then also a question picking up on what we've just been discussing with Maxine. What kind of questions are you receiving from your older residents? Are they service specific or more general concerns about self-isolation? And how are you trying to work within that space to support them?
Yeah, okay. So the first one around what sort of stuff do we have in a crisis manual is, I guess it's 3 key things. We have login details for social media, for our media monitoring tool, for access to our intranet, that sort of stuff. We have a list of contact numbers for key people. We know everybody is going to be working from home, or sort of office-based people, and the majority of office-based people are going to be working from home effectively from now. Yeah, so having, and we are optimistic that technology is going to work, but you know, we've got you know, I think a key for us is having some key phone numbers of operational colleagues across the business that we can get hold of, so we can get hold of those quickly, irrespective of whether our computer systems work. And then the third thing is media templates. So holding statements for responding to various specific incidents. Obviously, most of the time, it's you know, most things are being asked about at the moment is coronavirus related, but there's, you know, you still get the same, you know, lift breakdowns and all the things that normally are the sorts of stuff that press offices are fielding. You know, you can expect that stuff to keep coming, but with a coronavirus kind of you know, angle to it. So having those kind of those templated media sort of answers to media, you know, the sort of questions you expect to get is really important. That's what we've got. And then the second half of the question was, what sort of things are we being asked by residents or residents?
Older residents in particular.
Yeah, so the sorts of questions we're getting from residents are things like, well, actually, what's interesting, I think it's Maxine sort of hinted at it, I think, when she said that, you know, I think in some ways a care home is a sort of easier environment in many ways to deal with than housing, because obviously in our housing, people are, relatively speaking, younger, are more independent, more able to kind of come and go as they please. So I think one of the challenges we're getting and we're sort of hearing from residents is, you know, what do you do? What can you do if somebody chooses to ignore the guidance that we're issuing? And ultimately, really, all we can do is guide people. All we can do is sort of point people towards what the government's saying, or
Thank you.
then that's you know, that's up to them. And I don't think we are seeing huge amounts of people ignoring that, but I think that's where the nervousness is coming from. People are sort of afraid about how we're going to police this sort of thing.
Thank you. There's a particular question just building on that, and we're nearing the end, so quick answers, please, if possible. Mary, you spoke about giving reassurance, and you just touched on that again. Is that primarily about showing that you are taking action?
Yeah, I think, yeah, showing we're taking everything really seriously, we're listening to what people are saying, and actually a lot of it is about speed. So actually, you know, as soon as Boris had finished speaking yesterday, we posted immediately to say, we heard what you said, we are working through our response to that. We don't have all the answers yet, but they're coming. And I think that people have been really, really positive about just how quickly we're responding, and I think they accept that we won't have all the answers immediately.
Thank you. Maxine, if this is, I don't know if this is one you can help us with, but we've had a few questions about financial testing, and you referred to that in your presentation. What kind of scenarios are you testing?
So I think it was, so it's both testing our plans, but also being clear that we're capturing the data to demonstrate the financial impact of this. So, for example, I talked about workforce planning as we move through this, and potentially significant impact in the loss of workforce for hopefully relatively short periods of time, but continuous through the year. So we've certainly been testing that. We've been testing out some of our income analysis based on the scenarios of whether this will impact on people paying rent, whether it will impact on commissioning contracts for care and support delivery. For example, in our home care services, we get paid for the time we deliver. So trying to be clear about the impact of that as far as we can and talk to commissioners. So anything that's known, we're trying to do. We've also tested out potential increase in cost of supply, although there's lots of national messages that we shouldn't have that. I think in times of shortage, there will be some issues of cost. So we've literally gone through the risk log and tried to model the impact, but importantly, we're also keeping this clear log of where this is costing us extra money, where we will seek that from ultimately, or whether that will be funded through us is yet to be determined. But I think we'll have a clearer picture of how much this is costing.
Thank you. Another one which I don't think is a quick answer, but if you can answer it quickly, that would be brilliant. Maxine, have you used any type of matrix to decide which services to prioritise? I think based on your presentation you have, but is there anything you could share about how to go about that?
So we've got a vulnerability tool by the nature of delivering home care more than anything, because in residential care we use obviously care plans and support plans in supported housing. So we've adapted that vulnerability tool to help us in other areas. So we're making a view that residential care, we will have to have safe staffing levels, however they're determined going forward. But in home care and in some of our supported accommodation and community, that we could prioritise customers that we believe will need face-to-face support based on a range of criteria of other community support, family or their individual vulnerability. So we've now effectively got a prioritisation matrix that says in capacity staffing levels continuing to reduce, we would protect at all costs those in the highest level of concern. The issue about that is once you've done it, you've got to constantly review it because that will change. But if it happened tomorrow and we lost a significant proportion of our workforce, and just to give you a view for planning, out of the 2,700 staff, we've done some scenarios that said, what if the worst case scenario was that we lost some 800 of those and more if schools were closed. So I'm not sitting here in any means saying that's where we'll end up, but that's the kind of planning that we've done to be clear how we would manage our services.
Thank you. My final question, there is obviously a lot of discussion in the press as well as at government levels in Parliament around what will happen in the event that people are struggling to pay their rent. Clearly that is a really complicated issue, but I just wondered, have either of your organisations, Maxine and Mario, started to think through that side of where this could end up?
It's something we're alert to, and it's something that is being discussed at EB executive board level, but I can't give you an answer at this stage.
I know it's very early days, I think, and people are thinking it through. Are you in a similar place, Maxine?
Yes, definitely. I mean, our clear expectation at this time is that individuals will continue to pay their rent and commissioners will pay us for our care and support services. I don't believe at this point we should move from that scenario. What we have done out of interest is we do have a number, particularly on our housing side, of staff who offer kind of money support and advice to customers anyway. And we have this week talked about how we might quickly retrain some of our corporate teams perhaps to offer more of that, because we think that will be a service that more people may be looking, and that's quite practical advice about benefits, but actually really helping people get them.
Yeah, that sounds absolutely brilliant. So thank you both so much. We had a few more questions, but we have run out of time. So what I am going to do is we will post every question that we have been asked today and we will post them to the LinkedIn forum. You can see the link to how to join that here. It's the www.linkedin.com/groups/123 and there we would invite colleagues from everybody who's listening and indeed beyond to help us share information, share experience, share practice, so as that we are all as well placed as we can possibly be to manage this circumstance. As I mentioned earlier, we'll be sending you an email as soon as possible, which will include a link to the recording of the webinar as well as the slides. We will be, as I say, posting the questions to the LinkedIn forum, and I hope that you can help us answer them. I also just want to briefly mention in that, I've just seen that the Direct Works Forum, the National In-House Contractors Knowledge Sharing Group, for those of you who don't know, is sharing the guidance members are sending their members on they're going to share the advice that they are sending to their repairs team and customers, and they will post that to LinkedIn, which hopefully will help with the question we had earlier around contractors and how to have that conversation. So as I say, that's kind of the LinkedIn group in action, and one of the things that we at the Federation want to facilitate. Moving forward, we are going to continue to try to provide you with the most relevant and timely support that we can. That will continue trying to pull together all of the official guidance and clarifications where we can. That's the housing.org.uk/coronavirus link, which we hope will be helpful. We also want to, as I say, bring you together with housing associations to share best practice and support. So hopefully there will be more of these webinars if this is useful. And of course, we also want to identify the sector-wide issues where we need to work with government and others to ensure that we can support our customers through this really challenging time. Please do get in touch with us if you need any support. The final link, housing.org.uk/about-us/our-people/member relations, will take you to links which will show you all of our external affairs managers who are account managers in each region. They are your first port of call if you have any questions or if you think the Federation can support you. Finally, I just want to say a huge thanks to our speakers. To turn this around in just a few days is incredible, and the insight experience that they have shared is just so useful. So thank you both, Maxine and Mario. We really do hope that you found today's webinar useful. Thank you so much for joining us, and please do take care.